This is a rather old but close to the heart poem called Lilacs and Fabric Softener. An aimless breeze visited me during lunch today, burying a gift beneath her crescent smile. She wore a yellow sundress over her fair skin. Flowers came crawling from miles around, some inching over my skin and some trampling my lunch, just to bask in what they thought was her version of life personified. I have tasted infatuation like hers once before, this sorbet that makes the cheeks blush crimson yet feel infatuatedly respected for the mere blessing of such a feeling. She blew a kiss to me gently, and clinging to its undercurrents, the gentle smell of lilacs and fabric softener, the feeling that home is wherever the heart is. It kicks up the dust at our feet, which twirls along the path of listless lovers caught in a slow dance. Her breath works through the folds of my shirt, a restless hand in an ecstasy-soaked embrace. It fools with the buttons, plays ever so gently cat's cradle with the loose strings. I pretend not to notice. I pretend not to see her, but her peripherals never lose sight of me. We sit on a hill, in a slice of paradise that is all our own. The trees stretch infinitely so high that our intimacy peering from beneath their eyelids looks so gentle yet so infinite. The corners of our lips and the way our fingertips bump into each other nervously yet with so much purpose, as if we have done this before parents that don't judge in the slightest. Teenagers awkwardly dancing at a Sadie Hawkins as if we were two friends, gently figuring out that we were meant to be lovers in this fashion. Sharing lemonade in an afternoon like the moment would never end. This paradise was our playground, once upon a time, when we were simply children playing in each other's cyclones. How we explored every inch of our own forests, tiptoeing over our many wrinkles, mapping out our intricacies. We once had a throne on a hill that stood highest, close enough that we would paint the sky with still wet blots of white paint floating by in the sky. Our fingers still house specks of regret that we refuse to let go. This place is silent now. Our laughter and our whimsy and our musings long since having died away by her indecisions and my insecurities. To live out my remaining penance among these branches, among these thoughts, among these memories of her curiosity feels fair enough, but she will not let me be. Her breath having reached my hair and tousling every single strand as if I were still a child trying to work through this, and only whispering a single thought, smile for me. Could she possibly know? Do my broken features speak the kinds of volumes that spill out from her creases, archives of our indiscretions? Time has not been kind to us, darling. The fact that we are strangers now, in this night, the bones of our childhood persona still sprinkling visibly the taller grass embedded much too deep for anyone else to see, yet we still know we died here in each other's arms. Our smiles so fragile now, the slightest hyperbole would be liable to shatter our lips and break us apart, as if this were the best we could ever hope for. These are our brave faces now, monuments to who we once were, our love so preciously kept in Eden, fertile, 345 sunrises, 345 midnights, 345 tall tales and short stories that in the slightest space of my breath to yours was everything to us. So I return your smile so warmly that you conveyed it upon me, and we quietly finish our lunches, having cherished the subtlety of this moment, right before I turn and watched you gently disappear, fade back into the daytime vapor and atmosphere from which you came, for all of the nostalgia that you ever brought me. It still reminds me of that memory, of lilacs and fabric softener. This notion that home is wherever you decide to carry my heart with you. The fact that my heart will forevermore be yours.
Welcome to Taryn's Study. Today I am going to interview my friend Ceasar, who is also a local poet. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. I'm actually rather honored to be here.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So when did you start writing poetry?
Ooh, I started writing poetry altogether, just the methodology of writing poetry in high school. I started writing as a freshman, so that would have been about 2006, sheerly for my own convention, sheerly for my own curiosity. It wasn't until December of 2010 that I started to write for the purpose of performing it to others, and it turned into more of a lifestyle as I am now.
What was your first poem about?
Oh, goodness. The very first poem that I wrote, altogether as a whole, completed and for the purposes of performance, was actually about a rather, I don't like to call it unfortunate, but a lot of people see it as a tragedy. When I was in high school, my junior year, I actually came very, very close to being a father. And for reasons that aren't really important now, they're kind of a long story, it didn't pan out that way. And it unfortunately ended in a way that left me broken, to say the least. Someone encouraged me, if not to take that trauma and express it in a medical sort of way to try and get help, to try and express it in a means that would make me feel happier or at least at peace about what had happened. And so my first poem ended up being about the loss of my son and how that essentially defined an entire year and a half of my existence going into college and what my manhood would be moving forward. My reason to start writing poetry was very much a survival tactic. It was cathartic from start to finish, but it was more so, I don't know how to communicate these things to other human beings, and if I don't get them out, I'm never going to heal.
Do you have any major inspirations of different other poets that you read or have influenced your work strongly?
Absolutely, yes. I can split it between classical, which is the style, that everybody I think starts with. I was an English major, so I was exposed to a lot of different classical poets. T.S. Eliot was actually the first poet that I was ever really exposed to that resonated with me, and to this day remains one of my favorites. Langston Hughes, E. Cummings, in that classical sense. But if I were to move on to spoken word poetry, which is something that's influenced, I say, the back half of my career as a poet, I have so many different influences. Rudy Francisco would probably be the biggest one, and I've been blessed enough to actually meet him here in San Diego and perform in the same spaces as him. But he was one of the first poets I saw that took the classical style and moved it onto something a bit more less traditional, a bit more free flowing. And from there, Rudy Francisco led to Joshua Bennett, led to Mile Hodges, led to Phil and Sarah Kay, who I've met and had the blessing of just understanding that poets come from a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different really humble beginnings, but they all kind of work towards the same expressionism.
What role do you think poetry plays in society? Like, do you think it's important? Do you think it's...
That's a very, very good question. I think poetry still plays a very significant role in society, but it's not in the same sense that it did 100 or even 50 years ago, where it was very much a classroom, understood kind of means of communication, where we would sit in a classroom, read through a book, and that would be poetry. I think poetry more so nowadays, especially with the spoken word poetry that's influenced me, it's becoming more of a widespread thing. But I think with the way that social media and just media in general, how we're all consuming our narratives and we're consuming our creative experiences, I'm seeing more and more poetry start to seep into things like television, where it's not so much just poetry analyzed for the sake of poetry, but we're seeing poetry has this more overarching sort of experience, like, oh, that was very poetic in a sense, that made me feel love and that made me feel happiness, or oh, that was very poetic in a sense, that made me feel sad, that made me feel melancholy. I think it's just becoming more of an abstract sort of way of understanding ourselves as human beings, but at the same time, it's still very much there. I just don't think people really see it at the onset.
Do you have a favorite poem?
Ooh, yeah, absolutely. My favorite poem, hands down, would have to be T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. It was the first poem I heard as a junior in high school that made me sit up and think, I'm going to major in English. I'm going to be a writer because something about this makes such a beautiful amount of sense to me that I want to be involved in it. Funny enough, aside from the poetry aspect, it wasn't until much later in my adult life that I realized and had teachers tell me that T.S. Eliot was not heterosexual or heteronormative, and that his poetry reflected a lot of that, especially The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. So that poem actually played a huge role in me understanding that I was pansexual. And it took a good long while, but once it seeped in, I understood, oh no, poetry is a means of communicating with people outside of the norm, outside of this time period. You can communicate with people for eons if you really wanted to, but it's the underlying message that remains consistent, and it remains somehow this thing that we all will empathize with, regardless of where we are relative to the poem.
So I was reading recently a book by Amanda Palmer, who's the Art of Asking.
Ooh.
And she talks about how different artists, you use pieces of yourself to write.
Absolutely.
Because you need something to write with, but different artists blend at a different consistency. So sometimes you really blend it up, and sometimes it's kind of just barely chopped.
Yeah.
Where would you say you fall on that? Like, how much of
Ooh.
you is in your work?
If I had to give a very broad estimation, I would be more so at the end of the spectrum where that's me. That's entirely me, not even chopped, but that's entirely me flowing and blended into what you're hearing. That's actually a very excellent question, because I've talked to a lot of different poets about how much of yourself is in the final product, or how much of yourself is in the message that is going out to the audience. And I've met a lot of poets who almost take it more so as a casual, I can adapt to any message, not even so much mine. And I'm the complete opposite. I can't write about anything. I have to write about something that makes sense to me. But more often than not, when I write about something that makes sense to me, especially with what I feel as though have been my fortes in my career as a poet, romance, love, and mental illness, cognitive dysfunctions, those things always universally end up being something characteristic to me, because it's just me. It makes the most sense to me, and at the end of the day, it's still a very much cathartic exercise for me. This is more for me than anybody else. I always feel very blessed and very privileged when others in the audience can hear what I'm spitting, and they can think, he knows what I've been through. That always makes me very, very happy. But at the end of the day, this was more so a me thing than any of you, and I'm very happy you were all listening when I said this.
What are you working on right now?
Ooh, question. As of right now, I'm working on entirely too many things, and I feel like I don't have enough time. The thing that I was thinking about before I actually came here is that Button Poetry, which is a major platform for poets, routinely has different sorts of submission contests. And as of right now, they're actually running a submission contest for video poems until the 31st. That's my focus as of right now. Separate and apart from that, I'm actually trying to get back on a path that's more so inclined with myself as a performer. I had to take a very long period of time off, both to study for the California bar, lawyer things, but more so because I was actually suffering from the worst writer's block. And I used the bar as a reason to take a break and almost as an excuse to not really think about poetry anymore. And I'm really just starting to get back into that flow of I'm writing things regularly, I'm editing things regularly, and I'm starting to pick out different kinds of venues now that I have the time to go perform those things. So right now, I'm more so focused on performance. I have a lot of different venues here in San Diego, and I'm actually trying to branch out towards venues closer to Los Angeles, the Definitive Soapbox, the Long Beach Poetry Slam, several poetry slams that are in Los Angeles, but DPL, the Poetry Lounge, which I've not been to in ages, is something I would really like to take a look at. The other thing that comes to mind is that, unfortunately, I had an opportunity to submit a collection of poems for publication with a rather reputable publisher that I'm not allowed to say out loud, And for a lot of different reasons, I've actually had to backburner that because I couldn't meet the deadline. I'm hoping to have something in the way of a first draft by the end of the year as something, if not to show for this specific assignment, for the purposes of publication, because I've been putting off the desire to publish something in hard form for entirely too long.
And if one of our viewers wanted to follow your poetry career, where would they find you?
As of right now, all of my poetry, all of my work is predominantly actually on my Instagram. It's more so of a guerrilla kind of movement to vocalize myself as a poet. My Instagram being CZAR, like Czar, _ Yuri, YURI. That's very much the most immediate way of seeing the work that I'm editing and working on right now, and to see as updates what it is I'm performing at right now, to see little videos of how my work is going and what I'm hoping to do. Separate and apart from that, I'm hoping to build other platforms as the year goes on, as I move closer towards publication. I've had a lot of really stellar friends who've started their own websites, and I'm very, very proud of them, and I'm starting to see, oh, that might be something I would actually maybe excel in. So I'm very much trying to take it piecemeal, but my Instagram as of right now is very much the easiest way to keep in touch with me.
And I actually have some announcements as well today. This is going to be the last Taryn study video, and Hallie has some announcements coming up in her next video, so make sure you watch that one. If you still want to follow what I'm doing with my writing and have more interviews with local artists and things, you can follow my blog, which is on my website, TarynTyler.com. And you can also follow my Instagram, Taryn_Tyler_author.
It's a wonderful Instagram, by the way.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Hopefully we didn't run too long. This might